Just so you know, I will be recording this talk. I asked if that was okay, and it is. Mainly, I run a podcast. I run a podcast called Catholicism in the Car. And whenever I do a speaking event, something like this, I try to get it recorded if I can. Not only for the people that listen, but for myself, for my family. You know, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, my son has a lot of recordings that he can listen to, hear his father's voice, for that to be there. So I spoke to the Solanus Casey Society probably back in 2015 or 2016. Were any of you here when I gave that talk? You were here, Darren? I look a lot different now, yeah. Is it Mike?
Yes.
And Dave? Yeah. So is that is where it was? That's right. I thought it was. I knew it wasn't here, and I couldn't quite remember. I knew it was a different place. Huh?
You had less hair.
I had less hair, and I had more hair here. I had less hair here, more hair here, but
Different clothes.
and different clothes. Yes. So I was a Franciscan. I was part of the Franciscan Friars Minor, who were a group of Franciscans in this diocese from about 2010 until 2020, and you know a lot of my story overlaps with that time that they were here, because I discerned with them for 4 years, from 2014 to 2018. So that kind of gives you a bit of a general timeline before I go in to the exact details here. But I'm a parishioner of this, or I was a parishioner of this parish. I grew up here. My family and we now live up in Garrett. We're parishioners at St. Joseph's over in Garrett. And
I don't know your name.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say my name. My name's Parker Zerbal. Yeah. So yes, we're parishioners up there at St. Joseph's in Garrett. We're the youth ministers up there. We also do religious education on Sundays. But anyway, I grew up at this parish. Father Andrew Budzinski was very, very influential in my discernment, in my vocational discernment while I was in high school. I went to the youth group here, the Life Team youth group. So that would have been from 2010 to 2014, because I graduated high school in 2014. And Father Andrew, during that time, became the vocations director for the diocese. So he was into vocations before then, promoting them, but after he became vocation director, his promotion became very clear. And so having had a lot of interactions with him, myself, and gosh, in my high school class, I think there was six of us who went into either the religious life or the seminary. I think now only one is left, Caleb Cruzy. If you guys know him, he's going to be ordained a deacon. Sorry, this upcoming year. And so others would be Timothy Horn. He was a seminarian for the diocese for a little while. And a number of others. A few girls in my class or around my class went to the religious life. Abigail Lyon, she's now a sister with the Dominicans up in Michigan, and a number of others. So during that time in high school, I started to really get into my faith, and that was largely due to the Life Team program, I would say. And as I got deeper and deeper into my faith, as I learned more, as I got into a relationship with our Lord, he started to put on my heart a desire for a religious or priestly vocation. And I wanted to explore that. So in conversation with Father Andrew and many others, Sarah Hill, if you guys remember her, she was the youth minister at the time. Lindsay Klinker, she's still over there, leads the middle school youth ministry. They all kind of helped me during that time get oriented and figure out, okay, how do you do this, vocational discernment? And what's the first thing that you do? Well, you pray. But secondarily, and oftentimes this is the step that is missed initially, is you go on visits. You come and see, right? So if somebody's discerning the seminary, they go and they visit the seminary. They talk to priests. If you're discerning the religious life, whether a male or a female, you go and visit the religious communities, right? And so that was the first thing that I began doing, to really take that discernment into kind of the active sphere. And the first community that I discerned with during that time was called the Society of the Divine Word. They've been around since the late 1800s, but they're a missionary order. And they had some priests in our diocese down at St. Patrick Catholic Church, downtown Fort Wayne. And I got to meet some of them, and I went and discerned over in their seminary for a weekend. My family came with me. And it became pretty clear that wasn't the community for me. That's how it goes a lot, I think. People they'll take that come and see visit, and they'll say, okay, yep, I know now that that's either for me or it's not. And whenever I talk to young people who are discerning a vocation to the religious life, I tell them, the first thing, most important thing you have to do is just go visit. Prayer, of course, that's always kind of there, of course. But if you're just praying, you're not going to be able to discern properly. You have to actively discern, which means going and visiting. So I visited with them, and it became clear that was not where I was meant to be. And I came back, and I started looking into the diocese a little more, although I just kind of knew in my heart that diocesan priesthood just wasn't my calling. It's kind of inexplicable. I don't know how to give much of a reason for that, but it was what it was. To Father Andrew's dismay, I remember at one point, him being the vocation director and my being one of his teens in the youth ministry program, they have these retreats for the teens, and at the end they give them some sort of a memento. And Father Andrew had just been over in Italy, and during that retreat, I was praying. I was like, Lord, what do you want me to do with my life? Do you want me to be a diocesan priest? Do you want me to go to the religious life? And I kind of knew about the Franciscans, and they were really enticing me. And Father Andrew came back from Italy. He had been to Assisi, and he brought with him little San Damiano crosses, which are one of the main symbols of the Franciscans. And at the end of that retreat, he handed them out. He would put it over your shoulders, right? Put the necklace on you with the cross on it. And it was at that moment that I knew that I was called to be a Franciscan. It was just incredibly clear. And at that point, I had kind of had some interactions with the Franciscans in town, but that really pushed me to go and see. And I remember a while later, I was giving a talk. This was while I was a friar, and I was giving a talk, and I told Father Andrew, he was sitting in the audience, and I said, Father Andrew, when you placed that necklace on me, I knew that I wasn't called to the diocesan priesthood. Which was it's funny. Anyway, so I got through some of that initial discernment, and I started taking some come and see visits with those friars that were downtown. They had a house off of New Haven Avenue, a friary there, and before I turned 18, I could only take day trips down there, and I would do that about once a month. I think for probably about 6 months I did that, just to kind of get a good idea of what they do. And I was also just very, very attracted to their way of life, and I'll get into that in a second here. But after I turned 18 and after I graduated high school, I took a 2-week come and see visit with them. This is customarily what they would do and what a lot of religious communities do before you really officially start to kind of join them, is they'll have you come for a visit for at least 2 weeks. So that you can really enter into the life, get a good idea of how it all works, and discern whether it's a place that you want to stay at longer in those periods of discernment. So after that 2 weeks, it became very, very clear to me that was where I was supposed to go. I fell in love with their community, the Franciscan. They were called the Franciscan Friars Minor, And what did I fall in love with about them? It was mainly, they were incredibly authentic as regards the Franciscan life. They took Franciscan poverty incredibly seriously. They never used money. Everything that they had was they would beg for. It was given by donations. Their habits, which habits, right, are the clothing that are religious wears, were very thick. They were itchy. They were woolen. They were brown. Of course, Franciscans, and that kind of authenticity just struck me as incredible. And I think any of you who met them would probably say the same, that they were, there's no other word for it, they were incredibly authentic to the life that they were trying to live. So there was that. They would walk around barefoot most of the time. And as my time there went on, my feet became incredibly calloused, right? They would walk around barefoot, and you're wearing this thick woolen habit. It gets very hot in the summer, Luckily they were flowing, so the wind would kind of blow through, cool you off a little bit. It's like air conditioning. So I started discernment with them, and in the religious life, I'm guessing many of you know this, but there are mainly 4 stages that somebody has to go through in order to become a religious. And it's a period called postulancy, which comes from the word to postulate, meaning in Latin to knock at the door. You're knocking at the door. And that's generally a shorter period of time, less than a year. And it's a time of just initial discernment, like, hey, I'll learn about the community, kind of, if I'm joining a Franciscan community, we would read books about St. Francis. We read all of the collected works of St. Francis and his biographers, his initial biographers. And that was like a 3-volume set, like that big. So that was like our intellectual formation during that postulancy year, was reading that. And the reason for that was so that we could get a really good idea of what this Franciscan community was about, the Franciscans in general, right? What they were about, what Francis was about, and helping us discern as to what we wanted to do. Did we want to take the step further in discernment, or did we want to back off and go somewhere else, right? So that was a very initial point in that postulancy year. We would also have during that time just kind of a deeper introduction, basics to the Catholic faith. You would read the Catechism, a few other things. So the second stage is generally the novitiate. It's called the novitiate, meaning coming from the word for new in Latin. It's the new official members of the community. In postulancy, you're not a part of the community. In the novitiate, you are, but you're not fully in. You haven't taken any sort of vows, either temporary or final vows. So that's a year long. The novitiate is a year long, and it's really a year of spirituality. You take that year in prayer. It's often equated with a kind of like a hermitage year. You don't see hardly anybody during that year except for your brothers, and generally it's only the brothers you live with. You don't really leave that novitiate, that friary that you're living at. You don't usually leave that for generally the entire year. There can be some exceptions, but it's just a time of really deep spiritual discernment and training. And one thing we would do is we would read the whole Bible during that year. If you read 3 chapters a day, fun fact, you can make it through the entire Bible in a year. And that was just a beautiful, beautiful experience for me, was being able to do that. And you have a novice director who's kind of like a guide for you and your discernment in how to move forward, not just with the community, but with your life in Christ, okay, with your prayer life. And like I said, it being a very dedicated time of prayer was just beautiful, wonderful, wonderful. We, as a community, generally, we would have 2 Eucharistic holy hours a day, and we would also pray all 7 hours of the Divine Office, the Psalms. And So it ended up being something like 6 to 7 hours of prayer a day in one form or another. But I remember those times, those 2 hours of Eucharistic adoration every single day. It was wonderful. It was beautiful. Any of you that hopefully attend adoration semi-regularly know that feeling, right? So I made it through the novitiate year, and it was pretty clear that I was supposed to go on. The next step is called temporary vows, and it's generally a 3-year to 6-year period. Sometimes it can get extended all the way up to 9, depending on the individual person's discernment. In our community, it was generally 3 years of temporary vows. So this would be mid-2016, I think, is kind of when I took those temporary vows. And that's a further period of discernment, right? You're not fully in yet. You haven't taken the full vows to the community for life. And by the way, those who don't know, the 3 main vows in religious life are poverty, chastity, and obedience. Okay, and with the Franciscans in particular, the poverty means absolutely no money. Okay, especially with that Franciscan community, no money, only begging for your food, only begging for your housing, only begging for your clothing. It was beautiful. And then you take the vow of chastity, right? Not taking upon a spouse, not engaging in sexual relations, and then a vow of obedience, which would be an obedience to your superior in the religious life, whether that's your novice master in the novitiate, or whether it's they would call it your guardian at the friary. He's kind of the head of the house, or further up the ranks, all the way up to the head of the community, who's generally called the minister general. So those 3 vows, and I took them temporarily, which you have to do in a religious community. You can't just jump straight from the novitiate into solemn vows. Canonically, the Church has determined that you need at least a 3-year period of temporary vows in order to live the life of the community as someone would when they've taken those full vows, but you're not locked in, right? It's kind of synonymous, I guess you could say, to engagement, right? You've made a promise to that person, and it's a real promise, but you can back out, right? And those vows could be dispensed of by one's superior or by one's bishop, whatever it might be. And that was a time of even further intellectual formation. We had a lot of biblical classes during that time, but it was mostly focused upon really just getting into the life of the community. Again, those 2 Eucharistic Holy Hours a day, praying the 7 hours of the Divine Office every day, and then really during that time is when the person starts getting more into the ministry, especially in a Franciscan community, and that would be either going out and begging for the food, which was not just a ministry for the friars, but a ministry of evangelization, and a ministry of evangelization, because as you go up to somebody's house and you're begging for food, let's say, it's a perfect opportunity to spread the gospel, either just by one's witness of being there or verbally, right? And it's kind of a disarming sort of a thing, we've all seen preachers standing on the street corner and they're blah 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 blah, whatever they're saying, and that can be it's very offensive, not offensive like I'm offended by you, but offensive as opposed to defensive, right? But going out and begging, I think that's one of the beautiful things about the Franciscan charism, is that it puts the evangelizer, the one doing the evangelization, it puts them in the position of weakness. It puts them in the position of vulnerability. And the other person is actually in a position of power almost. They're able to assent or to deny to that request for food or what have you. So that was a very, very beautiful thing. And during that time, about 2 years into my temporary vows, the community started to experience some mismanagement at the top, and that resulted in a couple of the superiors being removed by the bishop, which I use this word because I think it's illustrative, but it also gets the point across. It was literally an organizational decapitation. And that makes it a lot harder for the body, the organization of the body, to continue on, to thrive, especially when it's young, when an organization is young. If you take away their head, it can be a lot harder for that organization to continue. And as many of you know, the friars eventually did not continue. And so like I said, I was 2 years in to my temporary vows, so 4 years in the Franciscans in total at that time. And the community did go into quite a bit of turmoil. There was, I think we had about 50 members at the time of when the superiors were removed, and within a month, I think we were down to 15. So we had, a good 30-ish people leave. And that was very hard. Like I said, I was 4 years in at that point. There were brothers who were almost 10 years in at that point. Because before they moved to Fort Wayne, they had been over on the East Coast for 2 years before then. So there had been brothers that had been in for about a decade. And to see this religious community that we had dedicated our lives to for such a long period of time, relatively, to see it kind of fall apart was a very painful thing. Not just for the community itself, but you're seeing your brothers, the guys that you love, that you've spent years with. You're seeing them suffer, you're suffering yourself. And it was a very difficult time in many ways, but also a blessed time. And I can't speak for others, but I can speak for myself and say that that time after the superiors were removed, I stayed with the community for over a year after that. By the time I left, there was only 7 of us remaining. And those friendships, especially those last 7, that I formed with them over that time of suffering, I can't even begin to explain it. The depth of those friendships, even still to this day, is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. There is something really beautiful about suffering, and we see that on the cross, right? There is something really beautiful about suffering and what it does for a relationship, either with God, right, of course, and my relationship with God certainly deepened during that time. But with each other, when we're suffering together as a community, whether that's a religious community or a parish or a church or a family, suffering has a way of either making or breaking you. And I think it's fair to say that it broke some people. I don't know people's motives for leaving initially, those who left over the first week or two. But I knew that I couldn't do that. I knew that I needed to hang on. I couldn't just make a knee-jerk reaction, quote unquote. Whether that's what those individuals were doing or not, I cannot say. But I knew that I needed to hang on till the smoke cleared, to see what was going on, and then evaluate. And it was during that time, like I said, that those few of us who were left really banded together and formed some of the most beautiful friendships I've ever had. And those last 7, many of them have stayed in this diocese and have become seminarians and or priests at this point, or deacons. Father Paolo de Gasperi was one of those last few. Deacon Ryan Timosi was one of those last few. The seminarian Oscar Duarte was one of the last few. And I'm probably forgetting some. Father Lee Allen, thank you. Father Lee Allen Fortin. He was one of those 7. What's that? I said Father Paulo, I think. Maybe I didn't, but Father Jose Arroyo. Thank you. You guys are. Yeah. So, out of, I guess what I'm trying to convey here is out of that suffering, that time, and I know that for many in the diocese as a whole, that was a time of suffering, seeing the community kind of dissolve. But there was so much good and beauty that came out of it. I want you guys to know that the seeds, whether people became priests or religious further on after that, or whether they ended up getting married like myself, the seed of Christ that was implanted in us during that time, it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away as long as we hold on to him. So to continue my story, I eventually, after that, the year after the superiors were removed, once the smoke cleared, I kind of came to the conclusion that I myself needed to leave, and it just became very clear in prayer that I needed to discern marriage. Again, it's one of those things I can't really explain, but it was just utterly, utterly clear. And I tell people this sometimes in discernment. If the Lord really, really wants you to do something, he's going to make it so clear that you can't deny it to yourself or to other people. And that's really what happened. So I left the community, which was a painful thing. You form those relationships, those friendships, the brotherhood, and then being the one to leave, to cause the relational pain even between those last few of us that were left was definitely a very difficult thing. I remember sitting there with Father Paulo, and he was the first person I told that I was thinking about that the Lord was calling me to leave. And we were sitting around a campfire, and I just cried. And I laid my head on his shoulder, and I cried. And I said, I know that this is what I have to do, but I don't want to hurt you guys. And still to this day, it kind of makes me choke up. And so, they were very, very, as brothers are, as friends are, when you have a true friendship with somebody, even if you're going to be separated a little bit, they're willing to help guide you out the door. They're willing to help you find the next horizon. Okay, and and that really was what happened. So I left, and like I said, I knew that I was going to discern marriage, and it had been pretty ingrained in us while I was a friar that discernment, it's an active thing. You can't just kind of dilly-dally around waiting for something to come and find you. Sometimes that happens, but that's very rare. And so I knew leaving that I had to now actively discern marriage. How does that work? We all know. You begin by dating, by courtship. And that turns into engagement, which hopefully turns into marriage. So I left the friars. I came back. I was living with my parents and my sister for a while, trying to find out exactly what to do next. And really what it was who to pursue. When you're actively discerning marriage, it's who do I pursue, Lord? And Maria, my wife now, my now wife, I had known her pretty much my whole life. She was friends with my younger sister, all the way back to probably first grade or something. And she later told me that I was the first person to ever teach her how to play video games, the Wii. I was the first person to ever teach her how to play Wii tennis, I guess. I was probably 10. And we had gone to the same high school. And then when I left, I started getting involved in young adult things here at St. Vincent's, and we got reconnected. I mean, I already had the connection with her through my sister. We got reconnected, and I said, you know what, Lord, I'm going to ask this girl if she would date me. Funny story. I asked her to go on a walk with me, and we went to the Bicentennial Woods. Do you guys know where that is? It's off of Shove, is that right? And Shove Road. And while we were walking, you know, I knew that I was going to ask her to go out with me, but I worded it in such a way. I said, "Would you consider dating me?" And I've never lived that down to this day. I've never lived it down. She'll be like, "Would you consider doing X and Y?" I don't live it down. But that started a beautiful, wonderful journey in my discernment. And like I said, you know, I knew as I left the friars that I was actively discerning marriage. I knew that was what he was calling me to. And so it was only 2 months before we started dating, I think. And to some that might seem like, whoa, what was he doing? Was he like eyeing her from the friary? And he you know. No, I wasn't, first of all, but we had hardly actually really had any contact whatsoever. She also never lets me live this down. She wrote me a letter while I was a friar, and I never wrote her back. Yeah, I never wrote her back. But, so we started dating, and you know, as many of you know, that can be it has its ups and downs, and it's another vocation that we discern. And you're discerning it. What's nice though is you're discerning it with another bodily human being, somebody that you can really bounce things off with, particularly. And you know, during that time, I was still very clear with her. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm called to marriage. That seems very clear. But I'm going to be open if the Lord calls me back to the religious life, or even to the diocesan priesthood. Although, like I said earlier, I never really had much of a desire for the diocesan priesthood for an inexplicable reason, even to this day. But we got to know each other more and more. Our initial dating was really rooted in the church, rooted in organizations in the church, the young adult communities that were around at the time. We did ministry over at the middle school ministry, Edge, here at St. Vincent's. And a number of other things. And during that time, I also, right after I left, I decided, well, if I'm pretty sure I'm called to marriage, I need to kind of get my act together, and part of that's going to school. For me, I felt like that was what I needed to do to go to college, and I entered into the civil engineering program at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. Which was definitely a trial by fire, having had no formal education, especially not mathematics, since high school, and then jumping into an engineering program was definitely difficult, and a big change in my mentality. And I was going full time to school, and I was working part time during that period of my life. So that was about 2 years. I was going to school, and during that whole 2 years we were dating, and eventually it became clear that we needed to take it that step further. So I proposed to her. We were up in, I snuck her away to a foreign country, Canada.
Stole my passport from my house.
Yeah, I stole her passport from her house without her knowing. I had her younger sister help me, and I had it in my pocket, and we were just driving, and I told her, get in the car, we're just going to drive. And so we drove up to Detroit, and then right across the river. And she was like, "Wait, that's Canada. What the heck are we doing? We can't get through. I don't have my passport." And I whipped out the passport. And I said, "Yeah, we do." We spent the day up in Windsor. We went to a winery. We went like a walk along the Detroit River there, and I proposed to her on the walking path on the Canadian side of the Detroit River. And she loves the snow, and I packed myself a little lunch pail, thermal lunch pail, and I put fake snow in it, and I put the ring in that fake snow, so that she had to kind of dig through it, and then I threw it all around like it was snowing, I think, and so it was a lot of fun. So we were engaged. We spent a year engaged, which was actually a very trying time. We will both attest to, and I'm sure many of you would attest to that as well. Being engaged can be a very, very trying time. Yeah, we were engaged in 2020, so COVID was going on. Our wedding venue got shut down. Luckily, we were able to return the deposit money, but it got shut down 3 weeks before our wedding. Is that right? Yeah. So we had to kind of roll with the punches, you know. And beautifully, we were married up in Warsaw. Father Jonathan Norton, who used to be at this parish, really good friend of Maria's, now a good friend of mine as well, but he was the priest that married us, along with a number of other priests were there. But we were married up at Sacred Heart in Warsaw. And like I said, everything kind of fell apart, and that was just, that was another moment of like, Lord, do you want us to do this together? That suffering, it brought us together. We persevered through it. It brought us together more deeply than we could have done otherwise. I think if our engagement had been just flowers and roses and whatever, and it wasn't just the COVID stuff and the wedding planning falling apart. It was also the stress of that really came out in our relationship, and we had a lot of arguments during that time that were hard, but as you all know, the arguments, as long as we persevere through them, they lead to a deeper understanding of each other, right? And that was what happened. So yeah, we got married. During that time, as we got married, I knew that I needed to work full time, and I was only 2 years through an engineering program at that point. So I decided to switch majors a little bit, and I decided to go into land surveying, which is a related discipline to civil engineering. But I could finish my school part-time and work full-time to provide for our family. And that's basically what I've done since. And I'm just about finished with my bachelor's next year. This time next year, I'll be done with it. But it's been a beautiful journey on so many levels, on the religious vocation, the married vocation, and then also like career vocation, discerning that, right? Not nearly as important as your primary vocation of the religious life, priesthood, or marriage, but a career insofar as it supports your primary vocation is a very important thing to discern. And so that has been a big part of my journey as well. So I think that pretty much brings us up to today. Well, my son Colby was born 2 Octobers ago in 2021. I got the date wrong this morning, or the year wrong this morning, and Maria waved her hand at me. But so he's a year and a half now, just a bundle of joy, and we have a second baby on the way, due the beginning of September, end of August. Well, the end of August is kind of the beginning of September, but anyway. So
Baby terms.
yeah. So God has indeed been very, very good, very, very good. Through all the sufferings, the biggest thing that I think I've learned throughout this whole journey is not to let go of the hand of our Lord. Throughout all the waves, you picture Peter sinking. when he tries to walk on the water, Jesus is already out there. And he starts sinking and he says, Lord, save me. And he grabs his hand, right? That's exactly how my discernment vocation has felt at various points. Lord, save me. Grab his hand, don't let go. He'll eventually bring you back in the boat. The sea will calm, the storm will calm. Of course, storms, it's an ebb and the flow, right? There's always points of suffering in our life. But as long as we don't let go, he never lets go of us. So I'll leave you guys with that. We can go into questions if anybody has any.
I'm just curious, what year did you graduate from high school?
2014.
Okay.
Yep.
You're close to my son.
Graduated.
We're in Radford County.
Okay.
Where did you go to high school?
Carroll.
Okay.
Yep, I went to Carroll High School. Pretty normal high school experience. I was a swimmer. I played tennis a little bit. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to hear that you had even that many classmates that pursued.
Oh,
some.
sorry. So when I said my class, what I meant was like my class among the youth ministry here. So
Okay.
that was people from Dwenger. That was people from Carroll, other places too. So it wasn't just from. Although I did have one other person from my class, Timothy Horn. Was a seminarian for our diocese for a number of years. So, yeah. He's married now, has a kid, and beautiful, beautiful story as well. So, any other questions?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, guys.